Hello, it's Alex, the Bookubus. Today I'm going to be talking about all of the books I read in July, and I had a really good reading month, so I'm excited to talk about these books with you. And before I get into that though, I did have two things I wanted to mention. One is that my channel is getting pretty close to 5,000 subscribers, which is very exciting, and I figured as and when, if and when that actually happens, I would like to do something to mark the occasion because it is quite the milestone, and I thought I would throw it out there. If you have any ideas or suggestions for a video you would like to see, or if you want me to do a Q&A or something, because it's been years since I've done one of those. But yeah, let me know what you'd like to see as a 5k thing, and yeah, I'll try and make it happen. And the other thing I wanted to mention is you might have already seen Regina's announcement video about the authors for the Lurking in the Dark HorrorTube anthology. If not, I will leave a link to the video, of course, but I'm one of the authors, so that's also pretty damn exciting. I am a bit nervous as well because this will be my first published piece of fiction, but yeah, it's a fun little story and I had a lot of fun writing it, so I hope you'll check it out. And I believe the release date is scheduled for October, and I know Regina will keep everyone updated with that over on her channel. So yeah, keep an eye out for details there, but I'm very much looking forward to it, and yeah, can't wait to read everyone else's stories too. So yeah, those are just two things that I wanted to talk about before we dive into the books that I've read. Okay, I have 9 books to talk about, and we've got a bit of variety. We've got a couple of horror novels, we've got some prom-themed young adult novels, and then randomly I read a few non-fiction books about rave culture. You weren't expecting that, I'm sure. So yeah, I normally talk about my books just in the order that I read them because that's easy, but I figured I would kind of group them. So I'll talk about the adult horror novels first. And one of those was Within These Walls by Ania Ahlborn, and this was a lovely gift from my friend Laurie, so thank you again, Laurie, for sending this book my way. I was really happy to finally pick this one up, and I really enjoyed it. I gave this one 4 stars. This one is about a true crime writer called Lucas. His marriage to his wife is falling apart, and things with his daughter are a bit strained, and his career is not doing too well either, so yeah, things aren't going so great for him. But one day he receives a letter from someone called Jeffrey Halcombe, who is quite a notorious figure who is currently serving time for his involvement in a kind of murder-suicide cult-related thing that happened back in the 80s. Jeffrey has never spoken publicly about his exact involvement and exactly what happened that night, and basically he offers Lucas the deal of a lifetime that he will tell Lucas his story. So this is definitely something that is going to put Lucas's work back on the map. It would be a definite success for him to have Jeffrey's story. The only caveat is that Lucas has to stay in this house where it all happened, but he is willing to do anything. Not only is he willing to pack up his life and move across the country to live in this creepy house, but he's also willing to take along his 12-year-old daughter. So anyway, we are mostly following Lucas and his research into this story and how that whole thing plays out. We also get a little bit from the daughter, Jeannie, which I really liked too, seeing her perspective. And then the third perspective is flashing back to the past, and we're following a woman who became involved in Jeffrey's cult. And so as the book goes on, we learn more about exactly what played out there and exactly what happened on this fateful night where people died. So yeah, this was a really great read. I was really sucked into it, really just eager to find out what happened next and how everything was going to pan out. So there are two kind of main elements to this. One is like the true crime aspect and the kind of research work that Lucas is involved in, and then also the backstory told by this character who was involved in the cult, and yeah, seeing exactly what happened there. And then the other kind of main element of the story is something of a supernatural element with these strange goings on that take place in this house. And I mean, as much of a horror fan as I am, and as much as I love supernatural stuff, I actually found the kind of mystery element to be the strongest part of the book for me. I just needed to know more about this cult. I needed to know exactly what happened that night. So yeah, I think that was the thing that kept me hooked the most. Although I did like the creepy goings on, of course, who wouldn't? I will say the direction the story took and the way things kind of wrapped up at the end, I wasn't 100% satisfied with. I feel like it didn't quite live up to the strength of the rest of the book for me. Like it had so much promise, and I just was expecting, you know, a really powerful, impactful ending, and I didn't quite get that. I didn't think it was bad, but it just wasn't quite as satisfying for me as I hoped it would be. But it didn't ruin the rest of the book for me. I was still, yeah, I still found it to be a really enjoyable read, one that, yeah, really had me hooked in. I gave this one 4 stars, and I would definitely recommend picking it up if it sounds like your cup of tea. And then the other adult horror novel that I read was Toady by Mark Morris, and this was originally published in 1989, and it's a coming-of-age horror tale set in the UK, and it's set in a seaside town during the winter time. So if you like reading seasonally, then definitely pick this one up in the winter. But yeah, I had a really great time reading this in the height of summer. So pick it up at any time of year. I highly recommend it. This is definitely one of my favourite reads of the year. I gave it 4.5 stars. And I read this as a buddy read with my friend Kelsey over at Slime and Slashers, and I know she recently talked about it in her July wrap-up, so I will leave a link to that video. Definitely go check that out. I know she read a bunch of coming-of-age horror in July, so yeah, she's got lots of recommendations for you. So Toady is about a group of 4 teenage boys, and they are fans of horror, and they have a horror club. And the book actually was also released under the title The Horror Club, so yeah, track it down under either name, but I do believe there is an edition that is edited. It's, yeah, I think a couple of 100 pages shorter than the edition I read. I read the original edition, which is about 700 pages long, which is, yeah, quite chunky, but it never felt overly long. It never felt like it was slow or there was anything unnecessary in there. So yeah, that is no mean feat, quite honestly. And oh, another thing, the author wrote this in his early 20s, which just absolutely blew my mind. Like, how do you just come out with this like epic 700 page awesomeness? Yeah, it was great. So anyway, the boys end up performing a seance, as you do, in an abandoned house in their area, and something happens, but yeah, it's not quite what you would think from that setup, and I'll just kind of leave it at that. But after this seance, each of the boys starts to experience some strange things and some really bad nightmares, but also, yeah, things that are happening in their waking life too. And bad things start to happen and they have to figure out exactly what can they do to stop it. So of course this one is going to draw some comparisons to It by Stephen King. You know, we've got a group of young friends and we've got some kind of entity that's after them, and yeah, other than some basic similarities, it really is a completely different book. So yeah, whether you liked it or not, I would still recommend picking this one up if you want to read a really excellent coming of age horror story. This one, it just had so many things that I loved. I loved the characters. I thought all of the boys were really well written. I loved their friendship as well. There were also some other characters that were really great. There is an older lady who is one of the main characters, Richard. It's his grandmother's friend, Olive, and she was wonderful. And then there are some bullies that are involved in the story. One of them is just a kind of really awful human being, and then one of them is this skinhead, and yeah, I mean, they were horrible characters, but yeah, absolutely great to read about. I really enjoyed the writing style. It was very compelling, and yeah, like I said, even though it was a pretty long book, it never felt like a long book. I just was, yeah, really sucked into the story and the characters, and yeah, me and Kelsey both had a pretty similar reading experience with it. We both really loved it. So that was great, and it was a really fun one to buddy read too and be able to chat about it as we went along. And then, yeah, just the details and descriptions of things were so well done, so vivid, and everything really felt believable. And yeah, the details, the descriptions, there were some like absolutely amazing horror scenes here, like so good, so good. I remember chatting with Kelsey about one in particular that I really, really loved. And I was just like, Kelsey, I was reading it on the bus and like simultaneously my mouth was agape at what just happened, but then also I was like grinning from ear to ear because it was just so good. And a side note, being on the bus, I was wearing a mask, so yeah, no one could see my weird facial expressions as I was reading this book. But yeah, just really strong visuals here and just really unique ones. Yeah, I loved all of the horror stuff in this book. It was just so good, absolutely brilliant. Some of it, yeah, is definitely going to stick with me. Like some of it was, yeah, genuinely scary. One involving a snowman, which, yeah, if you were to tell me that a snowman would be scary, I'd be like, skeptical. No, he made that work. It was great. There were things that were really gruesome and disgusting. There were things that were awful. There were a lot of emotional aspects to the story too. Like, I just didn't want anything bad to happen to a bunch of these characters, and yeah, things got very tense because I was just fearful for what was going to happen next. I think my only negative for this one is that towards the end there is an element that comes in that is a bit different to the rest of the book, and I didn't love it as much as the rest of the book, I'll just say that. It wasn't bad, but it was just different. And it didn't ruin the rest of the book for me or anything like that. It just wasn't quite my cup of tea as the rest of the book was. But I did feel the story kind of got back on track and it had a really great ending. I think the perfect ending for this book. It was brilliant. I just don't have enough good things to say about this one, honestly. Yeah, I gave it 4.5 stars. It'll definitely be in my favourites of the year. And yeah, I highly, highly recommend you pick it up. Okay, so moving on to the second section of the types of books I read. I read 4 prom-themed young adult books. I think they're mostly from the 90s or roughly thereabouts. And yeah, they were all really great. I will start off with my least favourite of them, which wasn't a bad book. I gave it 3.5 stars. It was still good, but it just wasn't quite as good as the other 3. And this is a Sabrina the Teenage Witch book. It's called Prom Time, and it's by Bobby J.G. Weiss and David Cody Weiss. And so this is about Sabrina the Teenage Witch, of course, based on the TV show. I loved that show. It was so good. And this book definitely felt like an episode of the show. Like, I could definitely picture all of the characters and the settings and stuff, and it definitely had just the same feel. Like the writing and the dialogue really came across as just like an episode of the show. So that was really cool. And yeah, this is about prom time at their school, and Libby, of course, is trying to take over all of the decision making for the prom and having everything her way. But Sabrina doesn't think that's fair, and she ends up casting a spell to try and even things out a bit. But of course, things don't quite go to plan. So yeah, she has to try and scramble to fix things. But yeah, this was a fun read. But yeah, definitely not like horror. But it was entertaining, and I gave it 3.5 stars. And then the other 3 were young adult horror, and these were all 4 stars for me. I highly recommend them all. I had a great time with all of them. So in no particular order, we have Prom Dress by Lael Littke, and yeah, this was wonderful. It had a really interesting setup because it's about a cursed prom dress, which is already amazing. And we have a character who, yeah, ends up with this prom dress and bad things happen. But then it's almost like an anthology, because the dress then moves on to another character and bad things happen to them. It moves on to someone else, etc. So it had kind of like, yeah, almost this like anthology style segments to the book with these stories within an overall story. I thought it was great. I could really like see this as a horror film as well. Like, I just thought that was such a great concept, and it worked really well. And then yeah, things all come together at the end with the original character, and yeah, I'll just say that there's an older lady that's involved. Like, the prom dress used to be hers, and she had a twin sister. That's all I'm gonna say. Yeah, this was just great. I had such a good time with it. I gave it 4 stars. Next is The Prom Queen by R.L. Stine, and this is part of the Fear Street series. And this is about a group of girls who are all vying for the title of Prom Queen, but yeah, seems like there is someone out there trying to kill them off. So yeah, this was a bit of a slasher, and it was really well done, thoroughly entertaining. I loved all of the different characters and the red herrings, and yeah, I loved how, yeah, some of the girls got really bitchy with each other, which was really fun. And yeah, this had some, you know, we had some real peril here. We had actual, you know, blood and stuff going on, which was great, of course. And yeah, I thought the ending was great, the reveal and everything. So another really fun one. I haven't read many Fear Street books, I've only read a few, but this is definitely my favourite so far, for what it's worth. And the last prom-themed book I read was Prom Date by Diane Hoh, and this was part of the Point Horror series. And this one definitely had a bit of a darker, more serious tone to it. Still a really fun read, and this is about, yeah, again, prom time is coming up, and it seems that someone is so desperate to be prom queen that they are willing to get all of the competition out of the way, shall we say. So yeah, again, this one had like actual death involved. It was, yeah, kind of a bit gnarly at times with some of the content compared to a lot of the other point horror books. And like I said, it just had a bit more of a serious tone to it, and like it just felt a little bit more adult, a little bit more mature than, yeah, some of the other point horror titles. I thought it was great, and yeah, the ending was, yeah, kind of unhinged and also a bit sad, but yeah, it was great. So these 3 were such a blast to read. Like, I really had such a good time with them, and I would highly recommend them all, whether you're looking for something prom related or not. Okay, and then last up I read 3 non-fiction books which were all about rave music and rave culture. So yeah, if you're not interested in that, then you can always, you know, say bye now. But my main reason for reading these was research, because I might want to write something set in this kind of scene. So yeah, I just wanted to get a bit of like background info on certain things. So first up I read Generation Ecstasy, Into the World of Techno and Rave Culture by Simon Reynolds, and I believe this originally came out in the late 90s, and then I think there have been a couple of revised editions that have come out. One of them came out under a completely different title, Energy Flash, but I think it's the same book just with some like additional info, I think, because it came out at a later date. So I think it touches on some other ways that, you know, music has changed since the first edition came out. Anyway, this was a really great book, very informative. The guy definitely seems to know his stuff, and he goes really in depth into the music, where it originated, which was like house, garage and techno music in the US, and that came over to the UK, and then yeah, it kind of morphed into our own thing that we did with it. And yeah, rave was like a huge thing, kind of started in the late 80s and into the early 90s. And my personal experience of rave culture was, I mean, I was a child at the time, so I didn't really get to experience it, but I definitely remember a lot of the music. I definitely remember, you know, seeing things in magazines and on TV related to it, and I guess, you know, at that age it seemed, you know, it seemed very like wild to me. It seemed very interesting, but I was definitely way too young to like have even you know, attempted to be involved in it. So it kind of always had a bit of a mystique to me, because of the age I was, I guess. And I mean, I've never really gotten into the music as such over the years, but there's definitely some absolute bangers from that era that, yeah, no matter what music I'm more a fan of, yeah, I'll still, you know, stick the KLF on from time to time. Anyway, the book, Generation Ecstasy, definitely talks about the rave scene in relation to the drug, because it was a big component of the scene, but it's not only related to ecstasy. It really does dive into the music, the different people that were important in the different musical scenes, you know, the people that made the music, the DJs that played the music, the people that attended the events, the clubs, the raves, you know, all of that stuff. And then how these different musical subgenres kind of morphed and transformed into different musical subgenres, how it all, yeah, progressed, and just the other elements within the culture that changed as well. The different mindset or ethos behind, you know, that particular subgenre, or, you know, that particular style of music or whatever, the different fashions that came with it, the different drugs, just the different vibes, you know. So yeah, it was a really interesting one. I did think partway through it gets into like post-rave, and so I didn't find that quite as interesting, just because that wasn't what I was reading the book for, you know, but it was still interesting. So yeah, this was a really interesting and informative read, and I gave it 4 stars. I also read This Is Not A Rave, In the Shadow of a Subculture by Tara McCall, and yeah, this one was somewhat similar in the respect that, you know, obviously it's a non-fiction book, it's going to be touching on a lot of the same elements as Generation Ecstasy did, you know, that's unavoidable. So yeah, some of it was covering the same ground, but I did think This Is Not A Rave did go in different directions with the topic and touched on some stuff that Generation Ecstasy did not, and vice versa. So, you know, I did get different things out of both books. I think if you're looking for something just really in-depth into the music, then I would go with Generation Ecstasy. If you're looking for more just like the scene in general, then yeah, I'd go with This Is Not A Rave, maybe. Because that one also had little snippets from just random people that are part of the rave scene, just little kind of sound bites on various topics. So as well as there being, you know, the main content of the book, there are also these little kind of snippets and sound bites, you know, from random people that are scattered throughout the book. So I thought that was really cool. And yeah, so this was another really good read, interesting, informative. I gave it 4 stars. And then the last one was Rave Art, Flyers, Invitations and Membership Cards from the Birth of Acid House by Chelsea Louise Berlin. And this one is more of a coffee table book. As you can tell from the title, it is mostly images. The author was, you know, part of the scene at the time and basically kept hold of all of the flyers and stuff from that era. So yeah, really cool in that respect to have such an archive, you know, to be able to flip through. There is some text content, you know, there's several pages detailing the author's experience with the scene, and so that was really interesting too. But yeah, it's mostly pictures. But again, I thought it was a really well put together book, interesting, informative. I gave it 4 stars. So that was everything I read in July. Do let me know if you've read any of these. I would love to hear your thoughts, or let me know what you've been reading recently, and if you have any recommendations, I would love to hear about them. Thank you ever so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully I will see you again in my next video.